All right, welcome to episode 4 of the Argue With Me podcast. In this recording, I'm speaking with Daniel Robertson, who is a relationship coach and a lawyer, although I'm speaking with him in his capacity as a relationship coach. We do get into the law a little bit, but mostly jokingly. It's a mutual interest that we have. This episode's a little bit different than the previous 3. It's not so much about politics or epistemology. It's more about what are the signs that a relationship is going to fail or need help. What's it like being a relationship coach? What are Daniel's thoughts on various topics involving human relationships? And I also owe Daniel a bit of an apology. We recorded this a couple months ago. I have a few of these episodes in the can, in the hole, whatever they like to say, waiting to come out, and just due to my work schedule, I wasn't able to post this as soon as I would have liked. So with that out of the way, I hope that you enjoy the conversation. All right. Welcome to the Argue With Me podcast. And my guest today is attorney turned, what was it, relationship
coach.
Relationship coach. I was going to say expert. I don't want to oversell. We'll just go with coach. Daniel Robertson.
Nobody's
Expert's
paying
fair.
me any expert witness fees yet. Just for coaching.
Okay, you haven't been called on to give an expert opinion about this yet. Okay.
That's right.
Maybe one day. So thanks for showing up to do this. I really appreciate it. For anybody watching, basically, I know Daniel only from Facebook. I find him, and I mean this in the nicest way, like eminently entertaining on Facebook. I always like your posts. I find that they're, worthwhile. I enjoy them, and also I like your sense of humor on there. So you're very playful on there. So I thought, you know what, I would ask you to be one of my first guests here. Otherwise, we don't know each other that well, so we'll probably find out some stuff. Fair to say?
That's right, Jerry. I think we found each other because, well, we have some mutual friends in the political philosophy and economic philosophy realm, interestingly enough. And then because we're both attorneys, somehow I think we connected that way. And then I think we connected before I started publishing any relationship content on Facebook. And yeah, it's been fun.
I think you're right.
Yeah. For at least over a year, just joking around with you.
Yeah. So just to clarify one thing real quick, I do have a bachelor's of law and a master's of law, and I do a lot of sort of legal related work, but I am not presently licensed. So nobody take any of this as legal advice. You need to talk to your own lawyer. But I'm super fascinated to find out how you went from an attorney. Was it in family law or anything related, or nothing, eh? Nothing related to relationship.
My legal background is in civil litigation.
Right.
And rather than family law specifically, it's been a journey. So I pursued law. Look, I graduated in 2011 from law school. I pursued law for a variety of reasons, but it did play to some of my strengths on the analytical side of things in terms of writing, logic, that type of thing. And I very quickly, even in law school, I kind of knew that there was a little bit of an incongruency for me because, well, my personality, especially the way that I acted and lived at the time, was I always wanted to take a collaborative approach. I was like Rodney King, why can't we all just get along? You know? And there was this part of me that really disliked the adversarial nature of our legal system and the adversarial approach to any form of conflict. And I disliked competition itself.
Right.
Which is that has various layers that we could get into. We could spend an entire hour just talking about competition and what that means. But it took me, I went into law. It was very difficult for me right out of the gate when I would be on the phone arguing with attorneys. And I hated arguing. I thought, why are we doing this? Why can't we both mutually work together toward a solution? And that took me on my own journey, which was, on one hand, I needed I needed to have the skills to be able to handle conflict, which I did not have very good skills in that area. And on the other hand, I also wanted to live according to my values. Now, let me just clarify what I'm saying is my I didn't want to live according to my values as kind of a peacemaker, as kind of as somebody who creates peace, empathy, compassion, harmony. I didn't want to do that because I had to. I didn't want to do it because I didn't have the strength or ability to engage in an adversarial form of conflict. I wanted to have the strength and ability to win an adversarial conflict, but to choose or to promote a more collaborative, peaceful way of engaging. So that led me on a personal journey of, okay, well, what do I need to do? What's getting in the way of me approaching conflict in a healthy way and successfully? And how can I, at the same time, increase my skills as a peacemaker? And that was the journey.
That's so. This is sort of timely in my life. I was actually just talking to a couple of lawyers not long ago about the ones that I work with frequently, about our views of really what the role of a lawyer is, right? Because you have some lawyers who will just stand there and bang on the lectern and will do everything they can to make everyone's life completely miserable. And this group of lawyers and I, we sort of are of the view that actually we're there to like help our clients solve problems, not to create problems in the name of being adversarial. It's an adversarial system because that's how we test evidence, right? But that doesn't mean you have to be adversarial 100% of the time. And actually, I find the best lawyers are ones that, you know what, they're rational enough that they can argue with you about anything and be convincing, but they do their clients the service of, hey, if your client is wrong or doesn't necessarily have the best position, or if it's unethical to continue arguing about a certain thing, they'll make that choice to sort of de-escalate. And
Yes.
I love working with that type of lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like it's easy to think of like, oh yeah, I've got this lawyer, he's great. He just yells at everybody's so disagreeable and whatever. And then you go like, well, how did wow, like how did that work out for you? Well, I lost and it was really expensive, but man, that guy, he's a bulldog. Like it's so conceivable that you would hear that. So I think that's great that you're so self-aware that like, hey, okay, I have to have these skills, it sounds to me, but that doesn't mean I have to employ them all the time. Maybe that's not my modus, not my mode of going through life here, right? Um, so you did this soul searching and you came to what conclusion?
Well, oh gosh, I've come to so many conclusions over the years. Um, well, one thing is that I learned very quickly that I could not achieve my goals in life without having a healthy way of handling conflict. I learned this is, gosh, there are so many lessons in this process. But one of the challenges that I kept running into is I actually have been successful as a lawyer in terms of my career. I forced myself to do things that were uncomfortable. So even though I was uncomfortable in conflict, I would still approach it uncomfortably and advocate for my clients and win some cases and lose some cases,
Mhm.
hopefully on the merits. And at the same time, I was still struggling in relationships, in my romantic and intimate relationships. And partly because of my values growing up and the family of origin and culture and so on, um, having a successful marriage, a lifelong partner was one of my values that I really wanted to pursue, and I found it very difficult to have a successful relationship. I didn't know why it was so difficult, and I had numerous painful relationships, and so I realized that this was connected. The issue of conflict and in my career as well as in my personal life where it was connected, and that it was what I really needed to dig into. And I guess one of the most important lessons, but this only touches the surface, but one of the most important lessons is that conflict itself is not a bad thing. How we handle conflict makes the difference. And if it's handled well, it can be an opportunity for growth. And if it's handled poorly, it can be an opportunity for destruction. So that's partly what led me down the path of pursuing conflict resolution as a career, as a study, as a part of my spiritual growth. And yeah, I mean, that's part of the story that brought me to where I am today.
So it's interesting, eh? Like the part of your life that you're having a hard time with, through your sort of sitting down and analyzing, what do I do about this? It makes sense to me. I would rather go to somebody who's had to do that hard work, even if they've struggled, to find out like, hey, I need some advice in my relationship, than somebody who got married out of high school and has been with the same person flawlessly for 30 years and just somehow has avoided any sort of like inner turmoil, like they've just never had to do it.
That's
Like,
right.
even though they might be performing it, they'll never be able to explain to me what I should do, or so um yeah, like I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I can see how that would happen, but that's quite a switch though, from being a lawyer to like a full-time relationship coach. That must have taken some bravery to jump into that one.
Well, in fairness, so it has taken some bravery. In fairness, I still am practicing law,
Okay.
and and hopefully my boss doesn't hear this yet, but I don't plan to do that forever.
Yeah, yeah. But you
um,
do plan to finish all of your responsibilities where you are, should you ever decide to go. That's the key.
yes, and I'm not planning on leaving quite yet. I have a
Exactly.
timeline in mind.
All is
So
well.
yeah, all is
Yeah.
well. And yeah, so yes, it did take some courage. I mean, partially because I've been promoting myself publicly on Facebook and social media, and so anybody can see my content. I have some high profile cases where I'm sure opposing counsel is looking me up and thinking, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah.
But it has not hindered my ability to um, effectively represent clients in cases. In fact, I would say that the confidence that I've gained from publicly putting myself out there has actually helped me perform better as a lawyer. So yeah, it took some guts, but here I am, and and I'm having fun.
Okay, good. So now we know how you got here. So let's figure out what you're doing, because I love your posts. I mean, they're short, but they're usually insightful. Um, I shouldn't say usually. That's not nice. They're always insightful, right? So let's get into some meat of this. Some of your opinions on relationships, because I'm sure I could use some help in this, like everybody else, right? Even though, I mean, my wife might watch this and she'll totally agree that I should get some help from you. So, why do relationships succeed or fail? Is that a good spot to start off?
Yeah. Well, but I would love to get your thoughts first.
You want to? Okay, so I think with relationships, that, oh man, it's complicated. I think first of all, so I told you, I warned you, I have a psychology degree, so I frequently fall back on certain ways of thinking. I
Hmm.
think that personality constructs, like the statistically derived personality models, are pretty steady in people. They change a little bit as they grow older, but not a ton. Their prefrontal cortex will take over, and the rational decision making uh, will get stronger, hopefully, as they age. But their personality will stay somewhat steady. And I think you really have to find somebody else with a personality. that matches whatever your personality is, right? So like I'm somewhat overbearing in certain ways. Not, I just am. Like I'll just be totally honest with you, right? I mean, I have a lot of very black and white opinions about certain things. I tend to get animated pretty easily. Uh, I don't mean this in like I'm yelling at my wife because I'm mad at her. I just mean she can like ask me a question about what do you think about that, and I'm off for like 20 minutes. All of a sudden, I'm talking about epistemology or something totally out to line. If I have a spouse who has no patience for that, I'm finished, no matter what I do, because I can't change that about myself. So that's, I think, maybe the most basic thing. And then to figure out what the other person's like, I think you have to have a lot of communication and patience because it's so people are complicated. They really are, and you don't fully know them for quite some time, I think, and especially until you've well, I don't think you should go around testing what people are like, but life will test. It just will, the longer you know somebody. And then you'll really get to know them. And I think at that point you transfer more into like a state of it's love, but it's more than that. It's like some mix of love and respect for the other person. And I think that's when you know you're in the sweet spot. Those are my sort of you know, on the spot thoughts. I didn't really prepare any of that, but what do you
Sure.
think about that?
Well, I love it. Well, I love it. Well, just one comment, because okay, so you said you're not licensed, but you are a lawyer, right?
No, well, so I could be, but I'm not. I'm actually a management consultant.
Okay.
Yeah, I will be taking the DC bar in February, so hopefully, because I'm Canadian. I don't know if you know that or not, but
Gotcha.
so
So
yeah.
the only reason I mention that is because for anybody who's listening, because this podcast may be attractive to lawyers, is what I'm imagining.
Oh,
And
it might be, yeah.
and for anybody listening, there's a book, I believe it's called something like "Are You Sure You Want to Marry a Lawyer?" So for anybody who has that kind of hard-headedness, they enjoy the analytical rigor and of philosophy and argumentation, and all of that. Yes, those are common, familiar. I mean, it's part of personality, which you brought up, right? So those are common challenges for people who have married lawyers.
Yeah,
Um,
I imagine. Yeah.
and perhaps management consultants, although I never came across a book for "Are You Sure You Want to Marry a Management Consultant?" So I can't speak to that.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's slightly different, but not. There's a lot of overlap, and it depends on what kind of consultant you are.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So well, um, I agree with you. I mean, I've given a lot of thought to this concept of compatibility, and yeah, I mean, I could start naming some names of psychologists who agree and some who disagree. Interestingly, the Gottmans have said publicly that they don't believe in compatibility, which I still can't really make sense of that comment, because the Gottmans are some of the most prolific researchers on the subject of marriage. They have a marriage lab, and so they've done incredible work, evidence-based, research-based work. So incredible. So I don't know what to make out of their comment about compatibility. But if you talk about personality, you've got somebody like Jordan Peterson, a Canadian like yourself,
Yeah,
who
I know
talks
him.
about um, looking for somebody who has, well, I think he would probably refer to the big five personality traits. Um,
I think that I don't know if he would specifically, but he should. Let me put it to you that way. He
yeah,
probably would, I hope, but he should.
as opposed to Myers-Briggs or something like that.
Yeah,
And um, if you have more in common personality wise, it's going to make your relationship easier.
yeah,
I mean, imagine an introvert who wants to stay home all the time with an extrovert who wants to go out all the time,
exactly.
or somebody who's open to experience and wants to go explore. They want to travel, they want to go to museums, and somebody who's more traditional and closed off, and they want to follow a routine. And
Can I give you the
um,
one I think is the biggest?
what's one?
Conscientiousness. I think if
Yes.
you have a very conscientious person with somebody who does not care at all, that is going to be
Yes.
an introvert and an extrovert. They can make some concessions. My wife and I do this. She's more extroverted than I am, right? So occasionally we got to go somewhere, and I know that.
Yeah.
Conscientiousness, though, how do you can't turn that off? You can't. Okay, today I'm going to be not so conscientious.
There are entire books and relationship coaching programs and systems and Instagram accounts that are just dedicated to conflicts regarding conscientiousness of my husband's a slob and doesn't pick up his clothes around the house.
Right.
It is a huge source of conflict and difficulty in relationships for sure. Yeah.
And it won't just be, I mean, that you might have somebody who's slightly more conscientious than the other person, right? And then they're pretty much the same, but one of them's a bit more of a slob, and you could probably overcome that. But when it's like, oh, hey, I just blew $20,000 of our money and didn't bother to consult, or that's just I'm this it's
Yeah.
not something that really happened to me. It's just like,
Yeah.
how do you even how do you even start? I don't think you
Yeah, where do you
can.
bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you create a bridge there?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I'd agree with you. And one of the interesting patterns that we see is sometimes people, especially when they're younger, around their 20s, will pursue somebody who has a lot of differences because it's so interesting that they're so different and it's exciting and it's like, oh yeah, I'm ready for a challenge. And then one of the patterns is, you know, sometimes those marriages don't work out long term because once you add on the mortgage and the children and the stress and going to the same job over and over again, the
Yep.
challenge of the relationship isn't quite as much fun. And so when people, if that marriage does end up ending with somebody who's very different, a lot of people choose in a second marriage to choose to find somebody who's more compatible, and the successful second marriages often demonstrate more of that compatibility.
So here's something I don't know, but could imagine. Like, so I could picture somebody going, um, if you don't know whether second marriages are going to work out more often or less often, I could see two hypotheses sort of forming, right? One is you could say like this person is has a track record of just not being able to get along with somebody, or it could be like, well, this person has learned from the first thing, and so they're going to make a better choice the second time. Sort of like not exactly the same, but like I said, I wouldn't want advice from somebody who's never had to do the work, right? So
Right.
are maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but like second marriages, do they go better generally than first? Like they get more divorces as a ratio, or
Statistically, my understanding is that second marriages have a higher probability of of ending in divorce than first.
really? Eh,
So,
interesting.
um, and the primary control for that is to ask somebody when when you're dating before getting married, ask them why did what has your history been in relationships? Why did they end? What have you learned? How have you grown? Have you ever been to therapy to deal with this stuff? Ask these questions and find out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like caveat emptor, eh?
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
yeah.
That's right. It's a big
So
decision to get into a marriage. That's a big commitment.
yeah, yeah. Like I don't mind at all telling you. I mean, my wife and I, um, we have a 5-year-old, and I work a lot of hours, and COVID was really bad. Sometimes we would barely see each other for 4 or 5 days, and I work a lot in evenings. Clients sometimes they can only meet in evenings, and we have to be able to trust each other, and to sort of understand that like uh, this isn't life forever. This is something that you um, have to enter into, knowing that not every minute of the day will your needs be met, but overall things will be good, right? So like I don't know how I would even handle somebody who demanded that I be there for dinner every day and also make a living doing what I'm doing, right? Like
Yeah.
I would just wouldn't work. So we
Yeah.
talked a lot about that before going in different directions, and it's worked well so far. Uh, do you get a lot of that? Like, hey, we're working so much, we're not talking to each other as much. I miss that feeling of connection. You,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I love that you just brought up needs, because that's actually the way that I answer the question of why do relationships succeed or fail.
Huh.
And I look at it through the lens of basic human needs. That I try to take a very practical approach. And I get that feedback that my approach to relationships is very practical. And one of the most helpful things that I learned from psychology was learning about basic human needs and realizing, why do people go and get into relationships? Because they have needs that they want to get met. And this is a strategy to get those needs met. And so it's very helpful to understand what each person's needs are, to communicate about what your needs are, and how you agree or don't agree to meet one another's needs. Um, and then what strategies do you typically use to get your needs met? And the reason why relationships fail, I argue, is because people are not getting their needs met in the way that they had hoped. And then the question is why?
Yeah.
And it turns out there are a lot of potential reasons why. One of those, because it could be because people don't even know what basic human needs are. Love is a basic human need. I Maslow's hierarchy is a great illustration to understand human needs. We've got physiological needs, basic food, water, air. And then we've got needs for safety and security, needs for love and belonging, needs for esteem, such as accomplishment and respect, and then self-actualization to be the best version of ourselves. So these, types of needs, but a lot of people aren't even clear on what their needs are, and let alone how to communicate them, let alone what strategies they're employing to get their needs met. And that really does, to me, get to the crux of whenever anybody comes to me with a relationship problem, I'm always asking, okay, well, what do you need? And then we just drill down, and then we figure out, okay, well, what's getting in the way? And that's the basic process. But yes, to answer your question, um, yeah, absolutely. So many people are in that situation of, wait, the love and connection that we were looking for isn't there over time because we've, been stressed out and focused on other things. It's extremely common, of course. Yeah.
So what do you? Okay, so yeah, that's a lot. I first of all, I think it's totally reasonable to see things that way, and I think I like your answer better than the one I gave. Now, this must be why you're the relationship coach and I'm not. I don't think my answer was necessarily wrong, but I like yours better because it actually, I think, covers mine still about
Yes.
personality and whatever.
Yes.
The Maslow thing is interesting to me because I've always been skeptical of it. Now,
Okay.
I'm not saying people don't have needs, and I'm not saying you absolutely believe in Maslow either. I don't want to paint you with that. But humans are interesting. They're a little different because they can actually not care about the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid if they don't have the stuff at the top of the pyramid. So how do you like I realize you have to be alive to self-actualize, right?
Yes.
But you will not necessarily want to be alive if you can't self-actualize. Um, and I think about things like Viktor Frankl, his logotherapy, about having a meaning in your life will actually allow you to get through almost anything. And he would argue anything. um, because I don't know if how much I'll explain a little bit. I mean, he's the survivor of Nazi, death camp.
Hmm.
Somehow he made it out. Almost nobody else around him did. His whole family was extinguished, and he was emaciated and missing teeth and all kinds of stuff by the time he got out of there. And he developed a basically self-soothing um, psychotherapy about how to view the world as worth, navigating in, even under the worst circumstances. And I always thought, like, I wonder what Maslow would say about this, because he managed to persist with none of his physical needs getting met and only relying basically on the top of that pyramid. Right. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or like I wonder, for example, to put it in the context of like a relationship. Um, if a person is not getting what they need out of that relationship, uh, I bet that the rest of their life will suffer, even in the bottom portions of that pyramid, right? So if they're psychologically being harmed by the relationship, or if they're just depressed because they can't get what they need, they stop eating, or they eat too much, or I don't know if you can pick up where I'm going with this, or if I even can, but how much, like, will mental health have that sort of reverse causation, you think, on somebody in a relationship?
Here's what I'm picking up from your comments, which I think are really fascinating, is people are very complex, and people have a lot of inner conflict, fragmentation, complexity, incongruency. So so people are all over the map on these things. So one thing that could happen when you say, well, some people might be pursuing the higher levels on Maslow's hierarchy, to use his framework,
Mhm.
um, without caring in what maybe seems like a reasonable way about some things that are potentially lower. And if somebody was doing that, if it was one of my clients who was doing that, pursuing, they think, let's say they're unhappy in their marriage, and what they think they want is to self-actualize. I would be questioning them and saying, and trying to figure out, well, why do you think you want to self-actualize? Is that what you actually want? Is what you want maybe something that's lower on Maslow's hierarchy? And I'm not wedded to Maslow's hierarchy, as you said. It's just one framework that I think is helpful. And I would want to know, what part of you thinks that that's the best strategy for you to achieve happiness? Or what is it that you want to achieve? Usually people want to feel good.
So here's what, yeah, yeah, exactly, right? So normally people want to just sort of do well, and I don't mean do good as in like some kind of ethical stance here. I mean, they
Sure.
just want to be doing well in general. And Maslow, it's like, okay, first you need physical well-being, and then you need whatever it is, security. I can't remember. You listed them off very well earlier. And then on top of that, like, once you have those down, you're going to get these higher forms of human functioning. But to me, it's almost like you can't, without the higher forms first, you're not going to get the other things.
Hmm,
So
I
I often think that, like, without some kind of understanding of, or without some ability to self-actualize, or some way of picturing yourself mentally, or understanding yourself mentally, you're never going to physically be well. And you're going to have to start somewhere at the top there, I think, to work your way down. Well, I don't think other animals are like that. I think just people. So I don't know.
Well, yeah. Um, that's a fascinating concept, potentially a limitation in Maslow's framework there. Um, and I only reference Maslow because it's usually what, if anybody has an understanding of what is meant by the concept of basic human needs, usually they've been introduced to that concept through Maslow first,
Yeah.
and that's the only reason why I mentioned Maslow. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think you're raising some good points, and humans, certainly we have conflict that comes from our sense of self that is distinct from what other animals in general experience. We have a different way of experiencing a sense of self.
Yeah,
And yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I think that makes our relationships a lot more complicated, right? Because you're going to have this internal narrative about who you are and what you're doing, and you may or may not be having that narrative sort of impinged upon by some other part of your brain that thinks you're telling yourself lies, or maybe that part of your brain is trying to tell you lies, and and
yeah,
then you sit there giving narratives, and you're all of a sudden uh, incapable almost of having a relationship or knowing what
yeah,
you want out of a relationship and that type of thing. Is
yeah.
you find like is do you think that's a fair way of I'm just sort of thinking about this here. Is that a fair way of describing some of the things you see with your clients or
Usually the people who I work with are a little bit more self-aware than that. Um, so they're often aware of the stories they're telling themselves and yet not able to get themselves unstuck.
right?
Um, but it's a feature of being human is that we are meaning making machines who will automatically we observe something and automatically and instantaneously give it meaning.
Yeah,
And if we're not skilled at creating the separation between our observation and the meaning that we gave it, then we can very quickly just assume that the meaning that we gave it is true and then cause detriment to ourselves by adopting a meaning that's not actually that's either not accurate or is not serving us in some way. So yeah, I do see
yeah.
that a lot. We all
I
do.
think
Yeah.
that that's like a good way of describing human existence in general for sure. I think
Yes.
that's yeah, I like that. Yeah. Okay, so what do? We got this person who you're right. I see there's going to be some self-selection in who comes to you because obviously they've thought, I need some help here. I've got some things I need help with, and they probably already have an idea, whether they're honest about it with themselves or not, of what's going on with them. So then let's say this person's stuck on a narrative of like I can I can imagine somebody coming for help with a relationship and they really just need to maybe there's nothing really wrong. Maybe they just need to reconceptualize the way they interact with their relationship. But maybe not, right? So how do you help them to decide something like that?
Sure. It's quite varied and unique because there's so many different situations. Um, so how to well, maybe I need to think a little bit more about your question. Could
Yeah.
could you
Yeah,
maybe
want to
ask
give
it
it like
again?
I'll make up an example that might be terrible because again, I'm just doing this on the spot here, right? But like,
Yeah,
okay, Daniel, my spouse, I'm not happy with the amount of attention I'm getting.
yeah,
However, I'm not sure if, by the way, this is hypothetical entirely. My wife's
sure.
watching. I'm not sure if maybe I am just being unreasonable with my expectations of another person, or maybe I really am not getting as much attention as I ought to get, or maybe I can't change. Maybe I need to get that much attention, even if it's unreasonable. How do I go about untangling this mess in my head, right?
Yeah. And I'm thinking about a variety of different um approaches for that. And people do come to me with questions like this, yeah.
I
And
bet.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this would be a situation where I would refuse to tell them what to do. I would never tell them stay in the relationship or leave.
Right.
But okay, so we can start with the framework that I raised of thinking about human needs and start to drill down what do they really need? Okay. And so if they need love, affection, comfort, and people have different needs and we we all needs are universal to all humans, but some of us value some needs over others just
Mm.
partly because of personality or a variety of reasons. And say what do you really need? So they're asking for attention and I'm trying to figure out initially, is this a need of theirs or a strategy to get a need met, to figure out what's the real need at the root. That's why I like to go there, because it's the root. And then consider potential strategies to get that need met. Because once people's needs are met, they're happy. And we don't need our partner to meet every single one of our needs. And so can they get their needs met in the relationship? And if so, how? So we'll look at, okay, well, I have a need for intellectual stimulation. Okay, well, can you go take a college course or join a book club or have some friends who you can get that from? Do you have to get that from your partner? But if what they're asking for is a form of attention that they can't get met from their partner, then we're exploring why. One thing is, it's very helpful to have an outside perspective with somebody with some experience who can take a third party's objective point of view, as objective as possible, right?
Yeah.
And we can say, okay, what you're asking for actually does seem like you're asking for more, or you're asking for less. Once you get experience, you can feel pretty quickly whether somebody is asking for something that's unreasonable or not. And it's helpful to be able to give them that perspective. So if what they're asking for is reasonable, then we just try to find a way to get their need met. And if it's unreasonable, then we figure out, where is this coming from? What's driving it? Because there's some kind of anxiety or something within them that's driving it. And we look at, what do they need to do to calm that anxiety and to heal and to be able to take care of themselves. In one of the most common situations, it is the situation where they have a reasonable need and their partner is, for whatever reason, not meeting it. So they want more attention and their partner's not doing it. Often it's some kind of issue with fear of intimacy or attachment style going on. And in those situations, that person then has a choice of, do I stay in this relationship and find another way to be happy? Which can often be, I do have clients who find themselves finding just great strength within themselves to, wait, I can be happy. I don't need this other person to do this for me. And they can be happy and find that within themselves, become more secure in themselves. And then other people, they're not there. They have a reasonable need. Their partner's not able to meet it. So they decide, you know what, that this isn't the relationship for them. And they move on from that relationship. So those are the most common ways I see that scenario working out, and kind of some of the options we would explore to address that.
It's interesting because it's like, here's a debate I've had with myself that's going to seem only obliquely sort of related until I get to the point. But I have a long-standing relationship with stoicism, right? So if I get stressed, I've been working long hours, not sleeping at night, I'm completing degrees, whatever I'm doing, I start to think to myself, maybe I'm doing too much. And then I start to go, well, what if you just what if you apprehended this differently, right? I mean, what if you just went like, well, this is just your duty to do it. And if you fail, you fail, and you just try to do your duty better next time. And that's life. I mean, you just keep going that way, that sort of thing. But then on the other side, you're like, well, yeah, but what if I'm like harming myself by doing too much? And the answer is not always obvious to me. And that's just involving me. But in a relationship, you've got like two people, and it would be hard. Like one person could be like, yeah, I'm not satisfied. I'll just stick with attention as the example, right? Like, I'm not satisfied with the amount of attention I'm getting. But this person that I'm with is really good in like 10 other ways. Am I then going to be stoic about that issue about attention, right? for the overall benefits of the 10 other ways this person's good? Or am I going to make a decision that actually this is going to be terrible for me if I'm stoic like that? And I just don't think I can even be stoic about this particular issue. And it would be hard, like you said, you can't give the person the answer because, like, imagine telling somebody, just suck it up. It's your duty to just continue like this, whatever. That would be horrifying, right? Like, but at the same time, if the person comes to that conclusion, it might be the right answer, right? So, like, I don't know how, like, is this something that you find people struggling with about whether they can apprehend things differently because of other factors, or
Yeah,
I imagine that comes into play all the time, right?
absolutely. Yeah, you introduced a whole nother level of complexity that was present in that question. So I'll can I go back in time and object on the basis it was an incomplete hypothetical?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Because you're bringing up a great point.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, what happens if, man, my partner's meeting 10 of my 11 needs really well, but number 11 is just like a must have for me and I'm not getting it? What do you do? Um, and yeah, I mean, we have to look at the individual person's overall good. Can they be happy? I mean, sometimes I have these situations where it'll be something similar to that, and it's actually having a detrimental effect on the person's physical and mental health. To be in a relationship where they are deprived of a basic human need. And I mean, touch is a great example. If you ever research touch starvation, um, it has a huge detrimental effect on people if they're starved of touch.
Hmm.
And it could seem crazy because I was arguing with a relationship coach a few months ago on Facebook because he was saying, well, if I can go here, his contention was that sex is not a need. And I'm like, well, how do you define need? Because he said, well, it's not food and water. You can survive without it. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
well,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, should I say then that emotional connection is not a human need because you could quote unquote survive without it?
You could, yeah.
So if a wife is complaining that her husband won't spend quality time and connect with her emotionally through conversation, should just suck it up because it's not a quote unquote need, it's a want, you know? So
Right.
um but yes, that's another level of complexity where somebody could, and that could be a person who's being unreasonable if they're saying, look, my partner is meeting 10 out of my 11 needs. Can I find a way to find some strength in myself and some resilience within myself to maybe relax a little bit on number 11 or find another way? Because Esther Perel, I'm probably saying her name incorrectly. I think she's from Belgium. She's a she talks about how much we've changed our expectations for relationships over the last handful of decades. And you could look in different countries and what people expect. But for some people, having a marriage with healthy children and respect in the community is kind of enough. Now we expect our partners to also be exciting lovers and best friends and stable and committed.
Yeah.
You want them to be reliable and yet seek novelty. You want all these conflicting desires from one person, which no one person can fulfill. So that goes back to the question of reasonableness.
Yeah, like I suspect that well, look, I haven't been dating in a very long time now, but I suspect that reels and social comparison habits that people have these days make for a really inaccurate picture of what other human beings can deliver to one's life. I mean, I haven't really looked into this at all about relationships in particular, but I do know that, like, people who are scrolling and seeing all of these sort of political or economic issues, getting mad about them and whatever, they start to overrate really even how much they can affect these things, right? Like their local it's very stressful to think that you could have an effect on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it's not realistic. So by removing that or by gaining that understanding, this is not realistic, the stress and anxiety goes away quite instantly. And I imagine that like a lot of people watch reels about people getting out of Lamborghinis, but also, um, you know, watching three children for their spouse at the same time, and it's going to be hard to live up to the fake ideal you see on like whatever TikTok or something.
Yeah. Yep. Very true. Very true.
Yeah, but
It's part of where we are in society, the state of affairs at the moment.
so I think this might be the thing that I most wanted to talk to you about, because I think maybe this is the thing that you talk about the most, and I can't, well, you'll correct me about this if your Facebook group is named after this. Um, no, it's courageous love. That's it, right? So self-healing. I see you talk about like self-forgiveness, self-care, self-healing, that type of thing. Quite a bit, I think.
Yes.
So what kind of person, and I say that without moral judgment, I mean, like, how would somebody identify that they need to do some self-healing?
Self-healing. I think that is not an easy question to answer in the abstract. It's often,
Yeah, I feel like I'm asking a lot of abstract questions, but if it helps to take it down to an example, that's great too, right? So like somebody's having a hard time even getting relationships going past 2 or 3 months, let's say,
yeah.
and you start to suspect, do you hate yourself? Like, is that the problem? Like, do you even think you deserve to have a relationship past 2 or 3 months? What does that look like? What does that look like on a practical level?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great illustration that you just offered. Because yes, really, if I see somebody who is trying to accomplish something and yet keeps getting stuck and not accomplishing it, well, that was me, right? That was me for years. My number one priority was to find a loving life, like a loving woman who I could commit myself to for my entire life. And here's the wild thing: there's so many women out there who are looking for that,
Yeah.
and yet I kept partnering with women who it kept failing with. Like, what was going on? And so, um, yeah, it's quite complex. But yes, if somebody keeps pursuing something, it might not necessarily be inner healing that they need, but yes, some inner work of some kind, inner exploration, figure out what's going on. If somebody is continually attempting to accomplish something and getting stuck, it's there's some inner conflict there to explore. And it could be the lack of forgiving themselves for something, could be an inner lack of self-confidence. And when you see somebody with, why aren't you confident? You have so many reasons to be confident in yourself, and they're not confident. Well, why? Why are they criticizing themselves so much? Why are they, you know, or anytime people are engaging here, well, here's part of an answer. Anytime people are engaging in self-destructive behaviors, they need inner healing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So
And I bet, like, I mean, so much of the reason relationships go awry must be self-destruction, right? I mean,
yeah.
so I can envision like somebody going, I don't deserve to be in this relationship, so I'm going to just be awful to my spouse until they leave. Like I could see that, you know what I mean?
I keep using legal analogies. Is it um you did study, right? You studied law.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah.
You,
Yeah.
so the analogy, I've seen this happen. It's the concept of either constructive eviction
Right. Yeah.
or constructive termination from a job.
100%. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I didn't fire you. I just made the work environment so awful for you that you quit.
Yeah.
I've witnessed this in
And
relationships.
maybe I did
Yes.
that because I didn't want to be honest with you why I want you gone.
Yes, or honest with myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very true. So people, it comes down to, and this is why my group is called the Courageous Love Community, is because it takes courage to be honest with ourselves. It's
Yeah.
really scary to think, wait, I did this to myself, or to go back into the healing. It's like you're going to a hospital and the doctor's got to get in there and remove the whatever, whatever the wound is, open it back up to get the infection out.
And it's like you're the doctor, you're operating on yourself in this
Yeah.
sort of analogy, right? It makes it even harder.
So you got to go back into the wound and get the infection out, and it's going to be very painful.
Yeah.
And so that's why it takes courage to do it.
I wonder, like you said, the people you talk to are more likely to be a little more self-aware than somebody who's just going to be spend their whole life not examining anything but be frustrated without a clue as to why. Which
Just
those
blame
people,
everybody else. It must have been
yeah,
somebody else's fault.
that's the easiest strategy for sure. It's
That was
everything
my old
is
strategy, and
really
it didn't work.
no, yeah, it really, yeah, it doesn't work in any aspect of life, unless I think you're really good at it. If you spend your whole life just doing that, maybe you'll be useful in something. But I don't think that's what most people want though. Um, but so like I wonder. Okay, somebody comes in for relationship counseling or advice. Is it most often just the one person you have confiding in you? Like, I think this is what's wrong with me. I need help. Or do you normally see both of them?
I've done a fair amount of couples work, but most of my work today is one-on-one work.
Yeah. So, Carl Rogers, you're familiar with him?
The name the
Psychologist?
name rings about. He's a psychologist.
Yeah. I
No,
really hope.
please explain.
So there's this talk therapy where all you do is you sit and you listen and you reflect. And you can find YouTube videos of him doing this in, like, I want to say the 60s and 70s. Um, and you, instead of sort of analyzing you literally don't engage in analyzing the person you're listening to at all. It's all self-analysis, and it just happens when you sit there. They'll tell you something. I think my father always hated me. And then he'll say, you think your father always hated you? That must be really tough. And the person will just keep going. And it's like they have the knowledge in their head about what's exactly wrong with them and what to do about it. And they can't get it out until this person just sits there, sitting with a total lack of judgment, listening and reflecting the exact same thing back to them. Um, and I think some people do this intuitively. I wouldn't be surprised if you're one of them. Uh, just based on this interview and other things I've seen. How much do you think people come in knowing the answers to their problems and just not being able to access it?
On a spiritual level, 100%. On a physical level, it does help to have a lot of, I've spent so much time learning from psychologists' clinical experience and practically what types of patterns arise and this type of thing, that it is very helpful to have the knowledge. But for what people need essentially for healing, it is there. And the reason you brought it up, the reason why it's inaccessible is partially the fear that I mentioned about going back into the pain, or the pain of acknowledging the truth. And then partially, it's a lot of self-judgment. So I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I shouldn't be thinking this. I should be grateful for what I have, or so on and so forth. And that will block you from finding the answers. So yeah,
Yeah,
the
it's
knowledge
like
is often there.
we're social animals that have these proclivities to just isolate ourselves, almost like a wounded cat, right? And it's like the exact opposite thing that we need, and then we do it, which is why I think actually your idea for this Facebook group is fantastic, right? I mean, anybody who's looking for some kind of connection, you want to tell people how to find that Facebook group?
Sure. The best way to find me would be to find me at facebook.com/Daniel William Robertson, and just send me a private message. You could also email me at danielrobertsononline@gmail.com. You can find me all over social media. I'm not hard to find. And reach out to me if you want more information on the Courageous Love community, which is what you're talking about. What
Yeah.
it is it's a weekly group coaching program, and we are helping people heal their attachment style, boost their self-love and self-confidence, and really learn the relationship skills that they need to be successful in a relationship. So a lot of people are looking for that bridge where they say, okay, I've gotten into relationships in the past and they haven't been working out. I need a bridge to figure out what kind of healing and inner work needs to be done before I'm ready. So I have it set up as a 3-month program that's on repeat that people can join anytime. And it's weekly group coaching. It's only $97 a month. And I've been recently told, one of my clients just told me I should raise my prices for what it's worth. So come now, because prices may go up in the future. But you could find more information at courageouslovecommunity.com on that specific group. So yeah, I offer that, and I offer one-on-one coaching and other things as well. But that's there are multiple ways to find me.
Yeah, great. Do you have a few more minutes, or?
I have a couple minutes, but I do need to get going soon.
Okay, I wanted to ask you one more thing because you've mentioned it a few times, and I actually am totally ignorant about, almost totally ignorant about this, attachment styles. You've
Okay.
mentioned this. Do you want to just give a brief synopsis of that, and
Sure.
then we'll move on?
Sure. Well, attachment styles, so it developed out of some research in the field of psychology, and John Bowlby is one of the initial researchers, and I wish I could name the other primary initial researcher right now, but it's slipping my mind. And one way to look at it would be to look at how children respond to their caregivers. And so what they observed in the research was you'd have children who had secure attachments with their caregivers, usually their parents. And when they had secure attachment with their caregivers, these children could walk away, be independent. They were happy. They could return to the parent, be comforted upon return, be happy to return. They're happy independent. They're happy together, right? You have other children who had parents who were kind of inconsistent with meeting their emotional needs and their psychological needs. And when they were inconsistent, most often what would happen for the children is that they would develop some kind of separation anxiety. I'm oversimplifying this greatly, but I'm giving you
No, I think
a
yeah,
quick
you're
rundown.
doing well.
I just feel bad because I'm oversimplifying things. But these children would develop separation anxiety. And so there's an insecurity. This would be called an insecure attachment, because the caregivers are inconsistent. The child now feels anxious when the parent or caregiver is gone. And so they would develop anxiety and want to be close to their caregiver and not want to let them go, right? They're afraid that their caregiver is going to be gone and never come back, abandonment, right? Other children, when they were more extreme, more neglected emotionally, more on a more consistent basis, would often develop an avoidant attachment style, which would be they would just learn to be okay on their own, and they wouldn't reconnect with their parents when their parents were available. So they learned just to be independent. And they learned, if somebody wants to be close to me, it's not really safe, right? I just need to be independent on my own. And then finally, there's one other category that would also be insecure, which is, it's called either a fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment style. And this develops out of these really traumatic childhoods. It's about 10% of the population. And and this person would swing between being anxious, like come here, and being avoidant, like go away, let me be independent. So they're swinging back and forth, and it's more varied. So those are the 4 basic attachment styles: secure, and then the 3 insecure types. And you can imagine what happens when we become adults. If we have an attachment injury that leads us to have an insecure attachment style in relationships, then the anxious person, who is the anxious separation anxiety experiencing child, now in a relationship becomes they become the clingy, needy person in the relationship, right? The one that comes off as desperate. The avoidant one becomes, they're avoidant in relationships. They won't let people get close. They have their walls up. And then their partner is left feeling lonely, or their partner's left feeling like, you don't even care about me. And then the ones who are disorganized, create some chaos in the relationship. And yeah, why does it matter? Well, I mean, in my own divorce, it was wild, because this attachment style issue was the primary issue. And I happen to be, it's more common that women are the ones who are more anxious, and men are more commonly the more avoidant ones. For me, in my marriage, it was flipped, which I think was part of the reason why it was sometimes confusing. But I went to 4 different therapists while I was married, who never told me about attachment styles. And who it was the core of what was going wrong in my marriage. And it wasn't until after I got divorced that I was reading more books and learned about attachment styles. And I said, oh my gosh, this completely explains what I just experienced in my relationship. So I do have a free Facebook group called Avoidant Attachment in Relationships. And this group is now over 8,000 people. It's very active and engaging community. And I found out that I was able to share this information with people everybody is experiencing the same patterns over and over. And once you have the awareness, then we can solve the problem, and we can work on it. So that's what attachment styles is. And it for many people, it can be the most important factor in the problems that they're facing in their relationship.
No, that's interesting. So I just real quickly, it's funny you say none of your therapists mentioned attachment styles, and I heard you using the word attachment styles, and I really wanted to know what your thoughts were on it. I said I was ignorant of attachment styles. I actually knew of all of the childhood attachment styles. I didn't even think that it might be the same thing, that these kids are growing up into their relationships and still displaying these things. How stupid is that, right? So, I think maybe it's the way that's taught
Yeah,
is when you go through that module, it doesn't really get into like too much. Well, maybe at my school, maybe I didn't go to a good school, but it didn't get too much into what happens to these people as they grow up, right? It's just like, what are the effects? It was more about parenting, how to be a
right,
good parent, right?
right.
So that's fascinating. Um, on that, I think I'm gonna just thank you for being on the podcast. And do you have anything else you wanted to plug or mention before we go? Or
Thanks for having me, Jerry. I
oh,
look
it's my
forward to
pleasure.
hearing more from your podcast.
Yeah, excellent. I hope to have you back. All right.